Well, welcome everyone to the Evolving Man podcast. I'm the founder of the Awakened Man and your host, Alan DeMonso. How many of us guys are still using the same technique or patterns in the bedroom? Has it been 10, 20, 30 years? Let's face it, sex can be pretty intimidating for many men, especially as we get older or if we've been ridiculed or worse yet, laughed at with our performance in the bedroom. Performance anxiety is nothing new, and it's not something we're generally going to go out and call our buddies to discuss now, is it? But no worries, because today we're going to get into this discussion about performance anxiety and empowering men in the bedroom to be from one of the world's top leading male porn stars. Before we get into that, I want you to remember to like and subscribe my YouTube and podcast channels. So with that, let's get on with today's episode.
Today's man knows who he is, where he stands, and what he aspires to become. Solid in his convictions, owner of his destiny, ever evolving into husbands and fathers our wives and children expect and deserve. We are the masters of our life and the leaders of our homes and community. Welcome to the movement. Stay strong, my brother.
As you know, I like to customarily start off by asking a couple of questions to help set the stage for today's talk. On a scale of 1 to 10, where do you rate yourself in the bedroom? Now, ask your partner the same question about your performance. Would that number be the same? Regardless of how you've answered these questions, my guest today, Erik Everhard, is going to pull back the sheets and give us the insights he's garnered over a 20-plus year career in the adult film industry and what it takes for any man to harness elite-level sexual skills. And so let me introduce my guest. Erik is one of the world's top male porn stars, having starred in and directed over 3,000 films. Erik is a professional coach and one of the most decorated adult performers in the 21st century. He's a leading authority on sexual and mental techniques, which can empower men and bring them success in the bedroom, as well and in all other aspects of their lives. In addition, he has a wealth of practical knowledge and holds a master's level certification in Neuro-linguistic Programming. Welcome to the show, Erik. How are things today?
Excellent. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great. I'm really excited to have this talk because, you know, it is something that as guys, we generally don't want to talk about. And I know I've given the audience a bit of an idea of what you're currently doing, but really I would want to get to know and have some interest in how a certain question forever altered your life. And so I'm wondering if you could share a little bit of your journey and how this question had got you started.
Yeah. So when I think about the journey, you know, the journey getting into adult film started when I was in Vancouver. It started while I was going to massage therapy school. So I was a student learning massage therapy, and on lunch break, I grabbed my lunch, grabbed the local newspaper, opened it up, and boom, there was this ad, you know, about 4 inches by 4 inches. And the ad was looking for women and couples to do a porn movie in Vancouver. And at that time, I had an ex-girlfriend, and she used to joke, you know, she'd be like, "Oh, you know, you're well hung. You could do porno movies." I'm like, yeah, thanks, sweetheart, whatever. Right. Because, you know, and this is one of the things about it, you know, us as men, right? Like sometimes we don't necessarily know what's true and what's not, because so many women, you know, they're going to pump up our egos, because there is a perspective of the male ego that can be very fragile, especially when we're talking about the bedroom. That's why, you know, we don't go to our buddies. We're not like, hey, you know, like shockingly, because of what I've experienced and what I've seen, like I have had buddies that would be like, they'll just turn to me and be, "Hey man, like you're the only person I could talk to about, you know, the fact like I'm struggling to get it up, like I'm not lasting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera." Right.
Yeah.
So, you know, so I took it all with a grain of salt when she said that. But when I saw the ad, I was like, you know what? I mean, she did say that might be something, right? And yeah, that's what kind of led me down that rabbit hole. And eventually I ended up contacting the company. They hung up on me, of course, which I understood, you know, after 23 years. At that time, it was very binary. It was like you could do it or you couldn't do it. It was very black and white. You know, this is predating Viagra, predating any of those, you know, performance enhancing medications that guys, you know, sometimes get trapped into because they don't need them, but they lack the right mental focus. And then it becomes this crutch. And the problem is, once you start seeking things like that, especially from a psychological standpoint, like it gets tough for you to ever let go of them, because it's this security blanket. And then when it stops working, then you're in a worse position than you were before, because now it's just like, hey, guess what? If normally you never hardly drink at all, you take 3 beers, you're like, woo, I'm having a good time. But hey, man, get yourself a drinking problem. You're able to have 8 beers and you're stone cold sober. And so it becomes the same thing with some of those medications. I've known guys, in the porn business who've taken copious amounts of Viagra, totally woodless, right? Because it's not helping. And their mental state at that point is so shattered because they've spent all this time, surviving on the meds and not learning, well, first of all, not learning how to focus, not learning how to calm their own anxiety, and not learning a structured process to go through to create positive feedback loops in their mind.
Wow, that's interesting. Really interesting to hear that even in the porn industry, that guys would have anxiety over that, right? And so it kind of leads me into, the next thing I wanted to ask you about, talk to you about how you feel that sex education that we've been receiving then has been flawed. And what do you mean by that exactly?
Oh God, because if we look at sex education, especially, I grew up in Canada as yourself, right? But, in the States, everywhere, they're not giving you anything useful, especially as a man. Like, when I had it in Canada, they wouldn't even really go into the fact it was like, hey, here's the penis, here's the vagina. They didn't even say you had to put one in front of one inside the other, right? Like, they're not telling you nothing. So you're sitting there and it's like you're this kid jacked up on testosterone. It's literally like you've been given the keys to a semi truck, at 8 years old, and your father says, hey, little Johnny, take that thing around the block for a spin and come back and brush your teeth. You're so driven by the testosterone and you have no idea what you're doing. So you don't know what positions are actually functionally going to work for the woman to get her off. You don't know, well, how do you control yourself to be able to last a long amount of time? You don't know, well, okay, if we're talking about eating pussy, like, how am I supposed to do that? What am I actually paying attention to? I've coached so many men where they get in there and I say, well, what were you paying attention to? And they go, I don't know. I was just down there. It's like, well, what did you feel? I don't know. Was I supposed to be feeling something? Right. And so I start to unpack that with them and I say, okay, because often we look at women like they're this big mystery, right? And I tell my clients over and over, I go, getting women off is very easy once you understand the body cues that the women give off that are unmistakable, because once you understand what you're looking for, then it becomes easy. The problem is, most guys, we go through our life, we have no idea what we're looking for. Nobody's told us in any textbook that, hey, you know what? For one example, like, nobody talks that the clit actually gets erect just like a dick for a guy, and that this can be your golden keys to getting her off. You don't see it anywhere, even in the Cosmo magazines, the women, all this stuff. Like, there's no functional, ABCs. Everybody wants to get very esoteric with sex in a sense, which, if we're talking about the language of guys, like, we like, ABC, like, we like structure and we like to go into something understanding what is our process and what do we have to do. So that's how I look at it, because that's what I learned over my 23-year career, right? You start to see, it's almost like seeing the Matrix in a sense, right? You start to see, and I don't want your listeners to get this wrong. I don't advocate that somebody needs to sleep with thousands of women like I did. That's not what I'm trying to get at. It's that there was a lot of learning within that. And what you do start to see is you start to see the threads of commonality that exist between all women. And I've often said that, the principles of what works to get women off are always the same. It's the application of those principles that will differ. And so that's where it becomes about the individual woman, is how you're applying those principles. But the principles are always the same. And you start to see just how, when you look at the mass scale of women, you can see how they are all very similar. And once you learn the techniques, the tactics, and the right mindsets to get them off, then you've got agency, right? And that's kind of what we want as guys. Like, you want to be able to go in and have that internal confidence that just comes from your sexual prowess, because I don't really think that we can necessarily extricate ourselves from that. You know, I remember, maybe you had the same experience. I remember being a kid, right? I still to this day, I remember it was biology class. I think it was grade 11. And, you know, somehow the dick size thing comes up, right? And sure enough, you know, one guy's like, oh man, well, I'm holding 8 inches. And then the next guy's like, oh, I'm 8.5. Oh yeah. You know, I got 9. Yeah. Another guy's, I got 8, you know, and then after you're in the porno business for 20 some odd years, I'm like, are you guys measuring from your asshole? Like, where are you guys coming up with these numbers? Like, I've been around like world-renowned porn stars that are lucky if they're holding 8 inches, right? So it's like, where are you getting these numbers from? But even back then, you know, there's this thing where, you know, no guy wants to, you know, underperform, and no guy wants any woman to think he can underperform. And yet we all have no idea at that age even how to perform.
Well, that's just it, right? And there isn't any real education on it. And as I said in the opening part here, we get you know, we find a few things that work. We do step 1, step 2, step 3, and we just tend to be robotic and replace it. It doesn't necessarily work all the time. And you know, heaven forbid that we get laughed at or ridiculed when we're trying to perform, right? Now, I didn't mention in the opening, but you did write a book. And but just as I get to talk about your book, how did NLP and ayahuasca help you on writing your first book?
Oh man, they were instrumental. I started getting my NLP certification in about 2009. And what had happened is I had attended a relationship workshop that a Bulgarian friend of mine ran, which was really powerful. And some people at the workshop were talking about this thing called NLP. And I said to myself, I said, well, what's that about? And so they told me, and I said, well, that's kind of interesting. And I was thinking of it initially from like, well, okay, this would be like useful in the world. You know, it's sort of like hypnosis, but it's this. And, you know, I was thinking about all the uses that would have. So my intentions when I actually went into the school, like, I didn't know what I was doing, but I certainly was not expecting what I found, which was this school up in Northern California, just outside San Francisco. And it was the most holistic possible place you could ever imagine. I mean, first, it was probably it's got to be one of the longest programs in the world. I mean, I was going up there for 3 years. And really, by the end of it, you know, I had to face all my own traumas, and every sort of layer about who I was had been peeled away. And so it was amazing, but at the end of the program, I was really so much a different person that I was sort of lost. And so I really felt it was like this kind of like lost decade, because I'm like, okay, well, you know, it's like, well, okay, I still do porno, but it doesn't excite me. And that's, you know, and that before that gave me, you know, sort of a sense of purpose, you know, as much as you could have a purpose in that, right? Like, it was like, okay, this was a really fun job, and I was, you know, one of the best in the world at it. So, and now all of a sudden I'm like, well, that's kind of lost its luster. And I feel there's something else that there is for me to do, but I don't know what it is. So after that, I still had so many existential questions when the program was finished, and I wasn't getting answers anywhere. So I knew one business coach in San Francisco that I was friends with. And what he used to do was he would take groups of entrepreneurs down to Peru to work on their businesses, and then do ayahuasca in between to get different insights. So I talked to him and I said, hey, you know, because I had done, when I was a kid in Canada, I did LSD once, right? Horrible experience, right? Because of course, you know, there was no container, there was no shamanic anything. It was like, hey, let's pop some LSD and, you know, go down to a bonfire. You know, big mistake, right? So from that point, I was like, man, I don't mess with psychedelics. I have no interest. But over time, I was like, I'm not getting any answers. And so many people, really intelligent people that I'd spoken to, said, you could get a lot of personal insights from this. Like, it's really worth going through the pain. So I reached out to him and I said, yeah, let's do it, and let's see what I can find out about. And all these things just sort of coalesced together. And then at the same time that I was doing all this stuff and getting downloads of information, I had one girl that I was dating in Los Angeles, and she used to say to me, she goes, yeah, you need to write a book, because whatever you're doing, I've never experienced a guy doing these things before. And so then that really planted the seed in my brain. And then I remember one day I just woke up and I just started writing. And it was something that I got when I worked with the ayahuasca too, where it was like, you need to share this information, because the thought really became, well, if I've gone through this crazy experiment, right, for 20 years, there was a lot of knowledge that I gained from this that you're simply just not going to get any other way. Like, I can't even now, if I were to think about it, I'm like, I don't know how you would, because where could you be exposed to so many women in so many different varied environments and in a safe sort of container where, you're not going to die of some deadly disease or have all these issues, and you can really learn. Because here was the one thing that I really thought about from a learning perspective that the porno industry gave me, that, again, I just couldn't see it from any other fashion. Because if you think about like sleeping with 5,000 women, well, okay, well, where are you going to have that sort of opportunity? And I could only ever think of really two ways. One, okay, if you're Brad Pitt, George Clooney or Leonardo DiCaprio, yeah, right, of course. But here's the problem with that. Leo or Brad, they will actually learn nothing, because they could come in 30 seconds. They could come in 15 seconds. I mean, from the woman's standpoint, she's just thinking, I fucked Leo, like that, check, right? So he could do the worst job in the world. She's excited. She's like, man, I got to fuck Brad Pitt. I'm good. So is Brad Pitt learning anything? No. Then you look on the other standpoint of it, like, some of these, super rich, millionaires, billionaires, and I've known some of them, right? And they just hire escorts all the time, right? Well, so you can sleep with 5,000 escorts, but that girl's job is to tell you you're fabulous. No matter what you do, nobody's ever criticizing you or guiding you or giving you some constructive feedback. Like, that's not part of that job, right? Because, if you were an escort and you were criticizing every guy that you slept with, well, you're not going to be making so much money now at this point, right? So the thing about the porn industry is it's a third party that's paying both of us. And I tell you, when you have that structure laid out, nobody cares about anybody's feelings. So you'd be there, like I've literally been there, where it's like we almost have a fight on set, me and the woman, and then it's like, you're pushed to the corners, and it becomes like two boxers. Like, okay, they're like, okay, action, and then you're like, okay, let's go back at it, right? Or you could be doing something, and the woman will have no qualms about, like, hey, I don't like that. Do this, okay, and you're like, okay, damn, okay, yeah. So on all sides of it, you really, when you remove that layer of emotionality, where everybody's in normal relationships just walking on eggshells the whole time, afraid to tell their partner about what's up. Here, everybody's, with that emotionality gone, everybody's willing to tell everybody everything that's on their mind. And so that's where you get all this massive learning, because as soon as somebody doesn't like something or something's not working, they tell you straight up front, because nobody's afraid of hurting your feelings. And I think that's a big piece of it.
Yeah, that's great insight on there as well, right? That makes complete sense, in that taking that emotionality out of it helps reduce some of that stress. So I want to get back into the performance anxiety piece. And in your work, you've come to know there are a few things that affect our performance. And I just want to start with, you started talking a little earlier about the mental process, but I wonder if you could get a little deeper into what you mean by the mental process.
Well, if we're looking at performance anxiety, there's a couple things that you really got to pay attention to. And one of the things that I've noticed, especially with men, and I really want your listeners to sort of stop using this language, because there's two words that I find are the most detrimental to a guy in the bedroom. I hope. Because as soon as you say I hope, you are now presupposing things are going to go bad, right? You always have the guy who goes, I hope I get hard, right? So now you've put in your subconscious mind that, this hope aspect, which presupposes things are going to go wrong. And as soon as you don't get hard right away, now you've confirmed your thoughts already. And so it starts this negative loop of just thoughts like, oh God, here we go again. Oh God, please, please, please. Oh no, it's not getting hard. Oh, now she thinks I don't like her. Oh, now it's just like last time. And now you're completely woodless and you're not going anywhere. Right. So you got to remove that. What you need to do is you need to build, something I talk about, which is this irrational belief in your penis. It was the one thing, because people ask me, well, how did you manage to do your first scene ever? And I really had to break it down because, as I was writing the book, like I had all these processes, but I'd never codified them before. And I remember one of the things that really stood out to me when I did my first scene is I never actually thought I wouldn't get hard. Because I never experienced that, right? Like it was just me, my dick. When it was me and my dick, it had always gotten hard. So why wouldn't it, right? So that had become my sort of belief structure. And this is one of the things that I talk about, guys, when it comes to performance anxieties. I say, okay, we need to determine what is your default state. I always have my guys, I have a form that I give them. I say, like, look, if it was just you and you're sitting at home, you can go into your fantasies, you could pull up some porn or whatever it is, but, let's functionally get hard in an environment where there's nobody around, there's no stress, there's nothing, there's no anxiety. It's just you at home by yourself. Now, what is showing up? How fast does it take you to get hard? How long do you stay hard? What's the quality of the erection? I want you to have all these, objective measurements available to you, because that is actually you. Like that's the true you. And I'd like to have that as sort of the mental cookie jar for you to go grab into and relate to if you're ever in an instance with a woman where it's not that. Because a lot of guys, they'll struggle maybe one time with a woman and they say, I'm broken. Their head goes to that space like, oh my God, something's wrong with me, blah, blah, blah. It's like, no. You have to be viewing it as this is a one-off. And it could be a one-off for a lot of reasons too. I mean, God knows I've been on set before many times in my life where for some reason my dick wants to get 85% hard, 90% hard. It never gets like rock solid. And it's like, today is no different than yesterday. When it was 100% hard, it's not different from last week. Like, what's changed? I mean, did I not get enough sleep? I don't know. I seem to have. Is it something I ate? Or is it just like, this is just the way my body's functioning today, and I can't concern myself with it? All I can concern myself is, okay, can I go through the processes to maintain a good enough erection, right? And am I not getting freaked out? And am I utilizing the two different hard-ons that I have at my disposal? And that's something I want to talk about to your listeners too, because, when we're talking about performance anxiety, what a lot of guys do, and I've coached a lot of men that do this, is they tend to collapse the two different types of hard-ons into one. And what I noticed, especially being in the business, was you really have access to two completely different types of hard-ons as a man. You've got the mentally created hard-on, which is what most guys think of their hard-on to be, right? It's that psychological hard-on. So they've either made out with a woman, they've seen a woman, but they've never there's no direct sexual contact, right? And so it's that one which just out of the blue, bam, you're hard in your pants. I mean, even as a kid, we would get them spontaneously for no reason, right? And of course, it would always be like when you got to do that math equation on the board, you're like, fuck, why do I have this hard-on in my pants, right? It's not going away. But that's a different quality of a hard-on, and it's totally different. The thing about it, though, is as amazing as it is that you can have this spontaneous, mental erection appear out of nowhere, it's not reliable and it's not repeatable. And that's sort of the problem, because we don't really know and maybe you've experienced this. I know I have. Like I could be, making out with my girlfriend on Monday, bam, hard as a rock in my pants. And I could be doing it on Tuesday and nothing happens. Why? Is it the fact that I'm just so familiar with her? Could be. Is it the fact that just that was the day of my body and how my body was going to respond? Could be. I mean, it's not that I'm not sexually attracted to her because, hey, Thursday when I made out with her, it was spontaneous again. But it's like you're handicapped by this sort of the will of God almost from that perspective. And I don't think that gives any guy sort of agency if he's thinking that because it didn't happen, he's broken. So then you got to turn to the secondary type of hard on, which is the one that if I didn't use it, I would have had no porno career. And that is, the one just of direct physical stimulation. But with that, what you're doing is you're zeroing in and you're purely focusing on the sensations, because that's one of those things. Like if you're focused on just the sensations, building those up will allow you to get hard, and that becomes, well, where's your focus, right? Because we can have our focus on us, or we can have our focus on things that are away from us, right? Like if I were to ask you right now, hey, go for a walk, you could go for a walk and I'd say, hey, how was that? You'd probably say, oh, that was awesome. And then I could say, well, did you feel your right big toe the whole time you were walking? Different experience, right? And I do that with clients and they're like, I can feel my right big toe the whole time I'm walking. And I say, well, we can do the same thing with your dick. It requires practice, right? So you have the ability to feel yourself and you have the ability to not feel yourself. And playing with that, again, this is very helpful in allowing you to not only be able to obtain an erection whenever you want, but then also when we go later into different tactics to be able to last functionally as long as you want in the bedroom. And that's a whole nother discussion, but the same principles do apply in a lot of different areas there. Yeah, that makes complete sense. The focus of where our attention's at and what we're doing. And I think for a lot of guys, who while we may be, we're married, I've been married now close to 20 years and focus a lot of times in the bedroom is still on, well, how am I doing? As opposed to, am I taking care of her? And am I paying attention to her cues? And so you touched a little bit on size earlier on, but not all of us are gifted with it. But does that mean that we can't or we won't be able to garner elite level skills in the bedroom? No, not at all. I mean, the funny thing about it, especially when you've been in the porn industry as long as I have, right? It's technique will always trump size, right? So what I always talk about is you got to have the minimum effective dose. And that, of course, is going to differ from woman to woman. But if you're the national average, you're fine. Like it's going to be more functionally about the technique because, I've dealt with some guys, and shot them, and seen them in the business, they'll have the biggest dick you've ever seen in your life. And like the woman's not getting off because they get lazy and they don't understand that at the end of the day, it's like, well, okay, how are we maximizing clitoral contact? Because that's the key behind really getting a woman off if we're talking from a penetration perspective, right? So you definitely need to caution, and guys get so hung up with the size thing because, it's visual and they see porno and it's visual. And it's like, well, there's a reason that you have the, big dicks in porno because the camera needs to see something, right? So it's not about pleasure. It's about functionality of we're coming in on like a side angle cheated way open. And the only way you would functionally be able to see what was going on is if you had a certain amount of length. So fair enough. Yeah. So let's get a little bit into some of the technique questions. So the next thing I had for you is, what are those keys to sexual compatibility? And how is it not what most of us would think? And how is it that, what can be the root? How can that be the root cause of some of the challenges we're having in our relationships? Yeah. So this is interesting because I often talk about the 3 pillars of sexual satisfaction, right? And this is a little different than what most people think about because the first thing in the 3 pillars is what I call sexual alignment. And this is really key. And often people overlook this. And this is the biggest problem that I see, especially when you look at sex education and everything out there today, the fact that, well, most professionals will say, well, if you just improve communication, then your sex life is magically going to improve. And it's
I had
like
a dime every time I heard that.
yeah. And you're totally overlooking biology. I mean, in my book, I talk about the 4 different types of pussies. And that was something that I just noticed, over the years when I was like, okay, what am I feeling and what am I experiencing? And these are qualitative traits of how they are on the inside. This is not external. Like there's no way you would ever look at a girl's vagina and be like, oh, it's going to be this type, right? These are all internal, but they matter because there becomes this, just like if you were trying to fit your key in your neighbor's door, it would not, maybe it would slip in, but it certainly wouldn't turn it, right? There becomes this biological lock and key alignment with you and your woman. And that's why you could have sex with one woman, regardless of her technique. And you would just be like, wow, that was so incredible. It felt so good. And vice versa. I've talked to women about the same thing. And they'll say, yeah, there's a very specific size, shape of penis that a guy has that just feels better than other ones. And it's not that there's one that is better than another in general, but you are going to find one that is better for you. And that's the key, right? It's like, and even if we were to look at it from the perspective of blowjobs from anything, you could get a blowjob from one woman and you're like, oh, this is the best thing ever. And you can get it from another and you're like, oh, I wish she would stop because, she's just raking her teeth over my dick and you've got all these problems. And what you don't realize is that's never going to change. You can't change the structure of her teeth. You can't change her jaw structure. You can't change the size of her lips. Like these are all biological impediments. And they're a problem for you, but they won't be a problem for another guy. And that's why what you need to do is, you have to find someone that is a match biologically enough for you. And that's the first piece where I talk about the sexual alignment, because that pillar is important. And I think a lot of bad sex stems from that, from people, they get a match with somebody. It's not a good match from a biological perspective. And then they think, well, it'll just get better. And they go 20 years and it never gets better. And then, then they're getting divorced. So that's kind of the first piece. Second piece I consider is sexual chemistry, but there I'm talking about vibration and pheromones, right? Like, okay, so because smell is a huge thing. Like you can be around somebody, and they've got this sense of smell. You're like, oh, this is a turn on or it's a turn off. And we're not talking, it has nothing to do with something's wrong with them, but it's just, these are chemicals that are telling us this is somebody that's for us or someone that's not, right? And you also get that their sense of their vibration. Like, what is their energy? Are they super lazy? Are they too active in the bedroom? Like where are we finding the person that's meeting us in the same place? So that's where you got the sexual chemistry aspect. And then the last is the sexual compatibility. And that's, the wants, needs, and desires of the person, because you could have somebody that, hey, I want to do crazy swinger events. Well, then if you want to have sexual compatibility, you got to have somebody that's into that lifestyle. Or if you're the type of person that's like, I love anal sex. Well, if your woman doesn't, now we're going to have a compatibility issue. We may be, the alignment, all these other things could be correct. But if suddenly what you're desiring out of the sexual, interaction differs from what they're desiring, now that's something you got to, either talk about, overcome, or that could be another issue where there's going to be a lot of strife, right? Especially, if somebody is super conservative about what they like and what they're willing to experiment with, and you end up with somebody that is crazy and wants to try it all, and now you're butting heads the whole time sexually because like somebody wants to do something crazy and you're just, it's not what you're about. You want, vanilla, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that two people have to be aligned in what they want to try. So that's how I look at it when I look at it from how you could better maximize your chances of finding somebody that you could have a sexual, good sexual relationship with, because you got to have the alignment, you got to have the right chemistry, and you got to be compatible in what your wants and desires are at the end of the day.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And I'm just wondering, does that change? At the start of a relationship, right? There's lots of energy and there's lots of power going on, and so sometimes not sometimes, I'd suggest all the time, that sexual compatibility we think is really high, and for a lot of guys, we tend to get stuck in that. Boy, it was so great in that first 6 months to 18 months, and then after you've been married for a while, course, that energy and that flame changes its how it's created. And I'm just wondering, does that shift also then from maybe what was exciting sexually then in the early days to as you get further along? Like, do we need to consider that might have been an anomaly in the relationship, or are we looking at it? Am I looking at it the wrong way?
Well, what I've noticed over my own experiences, and then a lot of other people that I've known, that's where the alignment piece is so key, because we can go anything that is new, right? Anything that is new is exciting just for its newness. But once the newness is gone, now we're left with what is, right? And what I've noticed is those people where they've got that correct sexual alignment, they're never tired of having sex with that person, because, if we're looking at sex through the lens of, sex touches multiple levels, right? You got physicality, emotionality, mentality, and spirituality, but it still is a physical act, right? And it's like, that's the part that has to feel good for us. And if it feels really good, we tend to want to do it all the time. I know from my own perspective, and this is what really hammered the sexual alignment piece home for me a lot, was I had multiple relationships with a woman. She checked every box you could possibly imagine, beautiful, smart, blah, 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 blah. But the sex was not good. And it wasn't a technique thing. That's where I was like, it's like it almost hurt, from that perspective. And that's where I learned, for me, there was a specific, type of vagina where I'm like, no, this doesn't work for me. And, in the beginning, this is somebody new. You're like, okay, this is kind of exciting. And then, 4, 5, 6 months in, you're like, okay, now I'm not desiring this because it's not new. And now I'm really noticing like, this doesn't really feel that good. And, I think if we're not enjoying the sensations and the feeling, that is really the thing that's going to keep us in it long term, wanting to just do it over and over and over with our partner.
Hey, that makes complete sense. It makes so much sense. Now, you talk about bedroom leadership and how important that is for men to be able to harness this so we can create sexual arousal. But so tell us a little bit more about what you mean by bedroom leadership.
Well, yeah, when we're looking at bedroom leadership, one of the things we need to take into account is male-female polarity, right? It's the famous author David Data talks about this at length, right?
Yeah.
That here's and this is a real problem that I see now that I've worked with a lot of younger guys around, is the fact that we're in this world right now where we got to watch our P's and Q's so much, right? And it's so egalitarian that now guys aren't willing to be bold, be decisive, and escalate the sexual act forward. And, on one hand, they're thinking, well, I'm going to be a nice guy. I'm not going to push things, and the woman's magically going to want to do it. But here's the thing, if, first of all, for them to have to do that, they'd have to become very masculine, which if you look at the workplace today, most women are suffering because they have to now put on a masculine role, be masculine to get ahead in the workforce. But that's making their bedroom lives suck, because, if the man becomes less masculine, so he's moving more towards his feminine, the woman's becoming more masculine, she's moving away from her feminine. Now you're getting into this, it's like the what's the word I'm looking for? You're just like buddies. There's no differences between the sex. It's like androgynous, right? So now you're buddies, and buddies don't have sex. Buddies watch football and drink a beer together, right? So that's where you end up, where the flame really burns out in these relationships, because the guy doesn't want to take charge and be the man. The girl is now having to sort of be the man. and all sorts of fall apart. So, if we're looking in the bedroom, the thing that I've noticed with most women, and this is something that David Data talks about at length too, is, if you're really, a guy, then it's like 80 or 90% of guys, like their actual place where they would feel comfortable is being in their masculine pole, right? Mm-hmm. Because, like guys can swing I've seen relationships where guys are mostly in their feminine and the woman's in the masculine, and that relationship works. She really wears the pants and he doesn't, but the dynamic works because they're both at so far polar ends of it. But most women, their natural state is going to be being in their feminine. So what you want to do is you want to both, bring that into the bedroom. And that means as a guy, well, you're going to have to lead the act, right? So it's like when we're talking sexually, it's like, well, you got to be bold, you got to be decisive, and you got to take action. But here's the key point. You need to calibrate in real time. And this is, when I look back at, the quote unquote, the Me Too movement and stuff where guys, they'll get themselves in problems. It's not that it's a problem escalating the sexual act. Most women are going to want you to. And that's sort of the paradox that guys are stuck in right now. It's like, they're like, well, I don't want to be Me Too'd. But then you ask any woman, she's like, well, if he was a real man, he would just do something, because the problem with consent is that it's covert. It's not overt. Most women do not want it to be overt, right? It's like, I knew one guy that, literally he would go on a date and he had this, I think it was a 3-page consent form that he said women would have to sign. We're talking, real out there kind of stuff. But most women are like, okay, now I'm totally turned off that I have to sign this form in case we potentially do anything. Like, what is that all about? And if you're calibrating how what you're doing is landing, then it's not a problem. It's just that, you really need to pay attention. Like, if anything that you do, how's it landing? What's her facial expressions? What's her body language? What are all these things? Because that's kind of what's going to tell you, hey, is what I'm doing working? Is she enjoying this? Or do I need to back off? Or do I need to, change tact completely? But you got to read the person in front of you.
Yeah, it's about getting out of our own head and paying attention to what's happening in front of us. And, it's not like I'm trying to think of the character there in the Big Bang Theory, but that's what I was thinking of, with the contract. It's amazing though, how we get lost in this, right? Because, and it goes back to our earlier conversation. We didn't have any sex education. We sure didn't learn it from our fathers. We didn't have a good job of it being taught through our school system. And unfortunately, we don't necessarily have anywhere for us to turn to. So one of the great things about what you're doing here, Erik, is that with your book, you're helping to unlock some of these mysteries for us, and to take truly the skills and the knowledge that you've learned through the porn industry to help the average guy figure out how to be better in the bedroom. And so I want to get into a little bit, one part of it, to talk about some technique here. And it says, why are men failing to last long in the bedroom? And how can this be trained by the use of what you'd like to call dirty biohacks and the rewiring of our neurology?
Well, so one of the biggest problems that guys are having when it comes to lasting is they don't practice like they should be playing. So I want to give you a little analogy here, right? And, because, I'm sure even up north, we like our NFL football. So let's take a figure we all know and love well, Tom Brady, right?
Yeah.
And let's picture for a second that we're starting to, it's going to be the 2022 season. And Tom decides, you know what, coach, I'm not going to play any games. He's like, you know what? I'm just going to sit on the bench. I'm going to eat Doritos. I'm going to get fat, put in the second stringer. And you know what? Somehow second stringer takes him all the way to the Super Bowl. Day of the Super Bowl, Tom gets off the bench, 50 pounds heavier. He's like, hey, coach, put me in. I know I've never thrown a ball for the last 6 months. I'm ready to lead the team to a Super Bowl. I mean, how do you think that's going to play out?
That's going to be pretty poor.
Not so well. Probably not so well, right? And that's the problem is, like, guys have, they've conditioned their bodies to last for a little bit of time. Most guys, like if we were to look at, guys in their youth and they're masturbating, it's like, It's like, hey, I'm in the shower, 30 seconds, get it done, right? Or I'm about to go to work, 30 seconds, get it done. I got a lunch break, 30 seconds, get it done. Okay, so now you've trained your neurology to last 30 seconds. Why do you think it would magically be any different now that you've stepped in bed with a woman? Like your body is saying 30 seconds is the de facto, that's the amount of time, right? So that's one of the first biggest issues is guys haven't realized that, well, if you're going to be able to last 30 minutes, 40 minutes, you have to put in the work to train your neurology to be able to do that. And so in reference to what I talk about with the dirty biohacks, there's a couple big epiphanies that I learned over my 23-year career. One of them was that, well, first of all, there was the training of the neurology and doing the long-term things to be able to last longer. But on the other side, there were things that we could do in the moment to be able to give us another 30 seconds, another minute, another 30 seconds, another minute of time. And the reason that mattered so much was there's something I talk about at length where I say, which I call the 5-minute marker. And that was something that I just noticed time and time again. Didn't matter the actor. You could take the pros of the pros, right? Myself included. And we would all have a day where we were super sensitive. And, the difference between the guy at home, and one of your listeners, when they're super sensitive, it's like, okay, that's how it is today. I guess I'll come and it'll be done. When you're a professional, if you're feeling sensitive 30 seconds into a scene, well, now you're looking up at the clock and you're going, well, okay, I got another 59 minutes and 30 seconds to figure this out because otherwise I'm not getting paid. So it's a whole nother level of stress and urgency to get it together. And so what I found, and like I said, this is all the actors that I've ever come across, they would struggle until about the 5 minutes. So it would be that first 5 minutes, 0.5 seconds to 5 minutes, that would be the big problem, because after that, their dicks would desensitize enough that then, now they could feel they could grab a hold of the beast, so to speak, and they could control it, right? So it was like, okay, how do we get to that level of desensitization without losing, without ejaculating? And that's where I use the dirty biohacks, which was, there's a number of different ones, but a couple of the key ones are pain, prevention of testicles rising, and depth, right? And those can all be used in different amounts and at different times to be able to give us another 30 seconds, another minute, right? Because one of the things, when you look at the prevention of testicles rising, and this was something that I was taught by an old grizzled veteran when I first got in the business, and you start to notice, like, what does your body have to go through to have an orgasm? Every guy, you'll notice that right before you're gonna come, your nuts just rise up into your body, right? Like, that's just biology. That's what happens. So it's like, okay, well, if we can circumvent that, if we can sort of cut that off from happening at some point, pull them back down, now it allows us to sort of rewire that for, like I said, 30 seconds, minute. You might even get 2 minutes or so, right? But now it's like, well, now we've just built another 2 minutes to get to our 5-minute marker, because all we're trying to do is like, well, how can we just keep moving until that desensitization occurs? Because it will occur at some point. It's just, we got to keep moving things along to get there, and then when you couple that with penis exercises, especially like Kegel exercises to increase the tonicity of your what's the word I'm thinking for? Your PE muscle, right? You increase the tonicity of that by doing your exercises, every day, every other day. And now you're able to last longer without even consciously needing to put in the effort, because it's like, same thing. It's like you look at bodybuilders, right? Like, they've been training all the time. There's that increased tonicity in their muscular system. That's why they look jacked all the time. Like, they're just standing there kind of relaxed, but they look really good. So, that's what we're trying to do. And with that muscle too, is like, you want it to be toned so that now you're able to hold yourself off without consciously forcing yourself to. It's just your body now wants to last longer than normal.
There we go. Well, this has been awesome, Erik. Great stuff. So, as a parting question here, what would be one thing you would want you could share with our listeners as they leave and they think about the podcast today that would really help them move and take that next step to get over their performance anxiety?
Well, the one thing that I would say, like, especially if we're thinking about performance anxiety, is no matter what, you got to create a positive loop in your brain about what you're doing. And, one of the best ways to do that is to just get yourself a hint of blood going first. We can do that without the woman seeing or knowing what we're doing, but the hint of blood phenomenon I found was one of the most revolutionary things that I ever came across, is a way of just creating that positive feedback loop in your brain. Because as soon as you get a little hint of blood, now your body calms down, because it's like you functionally have that idea that your dick works. Like, and there's no way that you can say it doesn't. It's like you get 20%, 30%, you just get that little flow of blood. You're like, oh, okay, my dick works, thank God, right? Yeah. And as soon as you have that thought, now it becomes way easier to get hard, because now you start getting more blood flow. And the thing about blood flow, which is funny, is in the positive, more blood flow begets more blood flow, because as you start to get a little bit more blood flow, your belief system increases. And as you get more belief in yourself, you get more blood flow, you get more confidence. So it just starts this whole tsunami of positive feedback, rather than the I hope strategy that you were going through before, where it's like, things aren't going correct, right? By getting that first little hint of blood, which you can do manually yourself, now you're creating the positive feedback loop to be able to then get as hard as you want, and then it's not a problem. So there are so many different ways that guys can take agency of, their erection, to not be at the mercy of their thoughts, to be mercy of, what the woman thinks, but they can actually control themselves. And that's what I want to leave your listeners with is, look, you can control this yourself, and you have the ability to do it. You just got to create that right mindset.
That's perfect. Well, thanks, Erik, for spending time with me today. We unpacked quite a bit, and hopefully we're able to shed a little bit of light on how men can break free from their performance anxiety in the bedroom and ultimately learn some elite level skills. So I'm wondering, what's the best way for the audience to get a hold of you and get involved in one of your programs?
Yeah, they can go to erikeverhard.com. I got all my programs there, as well as the newest program, which is Crushing Performance Anxiety, and they can go to crushingperformanceanxiety.com. It's got 8 video modules. It's got NLP exercises. I've included a 30-minute hypnosis exercise for guys so that they can, implant the learnings into their subconscious brain. And then we have an entire workbook so that they can get clear on, what is their default state and different questions, because, the more that we uncover the things that are ultimately causing the anxiety, and the more that you can see, well, where in the chain of the event is the anxiety occurring? Is the anxiety occurring when I'm going on the date? Is it occurring, as I'm taking my pants off? Or for some guys, it doesn't occur until the moment of penetration, and that's when anxiety hits them. So as we can figure out, well, where is the anxiety? Now we can better, adjust the ways to combat it. So.
Right on. That's excellent. Well, I'm going to make sure I put all that information in the show notes so everyone can get out there and reach out to Erik. Now, again, thank you so much for being here today. Really insightful, and maybe it's an opportunity for us to come back together in the future. Thanks a lot for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Evolving Man podcast. Are you ready to own your destiny? To become more the man you are destined to be? Join the brotherhood that is The Awakened Man at theawakenedman.net. and start forging a new destiny today.